Today we are at the Norwich Museum and we will be going through the sketches and drawings included in the Drawing Norwich online exhibition. Before getting into the artworks, first I would like to pose a thought experiment. The terms sketch and drawing are terms that are often used interchangeably. However, are they the same? Sketch refers to a piece created swiftly. Usually it is monochromatic and made with graphite, charcoal, or pen. It is the preliminary groundwork for a drawing or painting. The artist can work out their composition on a smaller scale compared to their intended final product. A drawing is a completed composition. It can be made with any medium, generally with the incorporation of color, value, and at a larger scale. However, audiences should not understand these definitions as rigid and inflexible, or indicative of an artwork's monetary value. Many artists also complete drawings with the intention of keeping the loose form of sketches within the composition. Sketch and drawing monikers signify the intention behind an artwork. When interacting with both art forms, it is important to remember, different interpretations and nuances of the art-making process are emphasized. As we explore the artworks here in the exhibition, we will be highlighting both the historical significance of the pieces, as well as underscoring the artistic techniques used in their creation. The first piece is actually a part of a series of 4 drawings from Norwich-born artist Kim Harrison, and commissioned by our very own Marie Avey. Depicted is a dramatic scene. 5 men are gathered around a table. 1 man is standing, the central figure, and he is intended to be Dr. Charles Duncombe, the representative of Norwich in the legislature. The other men in the scene are to be understood as prominent men of Norwich. This meeting was held in reaction to Duncombe's recent visit to England to raise concerns over the outcome of the 1836 election. In Duncombe's eyes, the election was rigged. He came back to Norwich disillusioned after not receiving the audience he wanted with Parliament. This meeting would have taken place sometime in early 1837. Here, Duncombe adjourns the meeting by standing. The group of men have decided to join William Lyon Mackenzie's rebellion against the Crown and march men to modern-day Toronto. Here, Harrison uses dramatic lighting to create tension in the piece. Only the grim-looking faces of the men are illuminated by 2 light sources, the candle lit on the table and the lamp to the top left of the composition. The lit candle in this composition tells us that there is still hope yet for our heroes. This drawing has a very low key. What this means is the overall shade value of the composition is very dark. Harrison used gray watercolor to make the composition even more dramatic. The several layers of watercolor placed on top of each other in an almost erratic fashion pronounces the tension that is felt in this meeting. This second piece in the Rebellion of 1837 series by Kim Harrison depicts Dr. Charles Duncombe atop his white horse, leading the Norwich rebels down the Norwich Road, which is now Scotland. The sign on the lower left register tells us the men are 2 miles from Scotland. Their intention was to rendezvous in Brantford and meet with reinforcements from Elgin there. They made camp in Scotland. Now, in comparison to the last piece we saw, this artwork has a very high key, or an overall shade value that is very light. This is a fantastic way for Harrison to articulate the snow that naturally would have been all around the men, as their march to Scotland took place in the winter of 1837. Another stylistic choice of note is that Duncombe is intentionally placed atop a white horse. This is a device used in art history dating back to the Renaissance. A white horse symbolizes purity and good intentions, so often military leaders are depicted atop white horses in their propagandic artwork. A famous example is Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon Crossing the Alps. Now, as we look closer at the techniques used by Harrison, we see that to create a value gradient in the figures, he uses hatching and cross-hatching. Hatching is a technique used in drawing, usually made with pen and ink, to add shading. So they are parallel lines that are drawn close together to create the effect. Cross-hatching creates a darker shadow effect by using lines drawn in intersecting angles. The third piece in this series depicts the occupation of Norwich. In the winter of 1837, Colonel Allan McNab stationed his forces in Norwich for 3 days to disband any lingering rebel groups. During the occupation, McNab had his soldiers loot the winter supplies from Quaker households, leaving families to starve. Here we see a female figure yelling after a thief as he flees her home. Another shady figure is seen in the background attempting to capture the poor woman's fowl. An excellent use of cross-hatching creates wonderful dimensions in this composition. I particularly like how the hatching was used to create the thief in the back extra dastardly looking. The comparison of this figure to the overpowering white of the snow creates a literal black and white visual, making it very clear that McNab's looting of Norwich does not hold any moral ambiguity. The final piece in the series depicts the preparation for the hanging of Daniel Davis Bedford, which took place in February of 1839 in London, Ontario. Bedford was a young innkeeper who became sergeant in the Norwich rebel army. He surrendered to the British on December 17, 1837, and was immediately jailed. He was bailed on June 9, 1838. From here, there are two accounts as to what happened next. Bedford left for Michigan after McNab's occupation of Norwich with the stated intention of collecting debts from a Norwich man who fled during the rebellion. On Bedford's return trip, however, he was in the company of 400 rebels who intended to cause an insurrection at Sandwich, which today is known as the Windsor area. Whether Bedford was in cahoots with the rebels or not, in the eyes of the Crown he was. The men were taken into custody, resulting in Bedford, among others, to be tried and hanged for high treason. Now, as we look at this piece, we see that Harrison chooses a high key again for the composition, which is fitting due to Bedford's February execution and the very likely possibility of snowy conditions. At the bottom of the composition, we see the back of two figures, which is Bedford being escorted to his untimely end. The soldier escorting Bedford is detailed with cross-hatching and creates the details in his cloak and creates a very rough, aggressive texture. On Bedford, we see soft brushstrokes of gray watercolor, creating a somber and sorrowful effect. This drawing, signed by Iris Sokol in the bottom right corner, depicts the main building for the museum, our meeting house. The story behind how the meeting house became a part of the museum is that the Quakers alerted the Pioneer Society that they could no longer maintain their building. So, they gifted the building to the newly formed Historical Society in 1968. In 1970, the museum opened. The key feature that tells us this drawing was completed post-1970 is the inclusion of the ramp, as the ramp did not exist when it was the Friends Meeting House. This year marks the 51st year since the museum was opened and the inception of the Norwich District Historical Society. As we turn our attention to the drawing's composition, let's take a moment to appreciate the realism that could be captured. Upon first glance, anyone familiar with the meeting house recognizes it right away. As we look at this drawing longer, though, you begin to notice that something is missing. We have no definitive idea where our light source for this piece is coming from. Value is still used to create depth and detail, but nothing in this composition casts a shadow. After this realization, do you consider this piece a drawing or a sketch? This streetscape represents the evolution that Norwich has undergone in the last 50 years. The artist, Sarah Walker Moore, was raised in the house right across from the museum. This piece was made sometime in the 1970s. Depicted is the red brick building at the corner of Main Street and Stover Street North. Our downtown core has managed to stay recognizable, yet has continually shifted. You will notice that some of the shop names are different than what they are from today. This piece is made with an ochre-colored ink, which signals to me that it is to be understood as an underpainting, the first rough sketch of a painting composition. One element I would like to focus on in this piece, though, is the use of two-point perspective. This gives us a mathematically correct depiction of this intersection. So two-point perspective is a type of linear perspective in which parallel lines of the composition move towards two vanishing points. This creates an object that shows two of its sides. Here is a visual of where those invisible lines actually are. The use of the method of two-point perspective dates back to 1505, and it is a technique that is still used today to depict two sides of a single object. The Beaconsville Meeting House, now a private residence, was built in 1876 on property deeded from the Walker Farm. Friends built the meeting house as an auxiliary to the old brick that used to stand on Quaker Street. The meeting house was built to accommodate the Friends in the area, as the trek to the red brick on Quaker Street was about 8 kilometers long. This pen and ink drawing also uses hatching and cross-hatching to develop the value in the composition. The details on the trees and on the meeting house all exhibit this technique. In this piece, it is harder to find the perspective lines used by Moore to make the composition. Our first clue to finding our perspective lines is to find the horizon line, which we can faintly see here. Now, as we look at the meeting house, we see two sides of it. We now look for the parallel lines of the composition. This side of the meeting house is very easy to find this first set. From here, we can extrapolate where the second set of parallel lines will converge with the first, and they can be found here. This piece, like the previous one by Sarah Moore, is an excellent application of two-point perspective. Graphic satire is a visual device used to ridicule the follies and shortcomings of a critiqued party with the hope of embarrassing them into self-reflection and self-improvement. The artist behind this piece was a local woman by the name of Jessie Poole. So let's go through the elements of this piece together. The man here represents the human condition and humans themselves. Here he is sleeping, implied to be falling to the moral wayside because he is leaning on idleness. Because of his idleness, opportunity, signified by the deer, is passing him by. The opportunity can be achieved through industry or the gun. However, we can read this satire in the completely opposite way. Industry is killing opportunities because it allows for idleness. Which interpretation do you believe is the intended meaning behind this piece? This piece reminds me of the old saying, "The opportunity that God sends does not wake up him who is asleep." The Mastodon bones found in Burgessville in 1933 created quite a sensation. Roy Marners, a farmer located 4 miles from Norwich, found the bones in his field. The bones were sent to Toronto to be analyzed at the Royal Ontario Museum. The pieces we have in our collections were confirmed to be the tibia, the astragalus, and the pelvic bone of a mastodon. This doodle was used in part of a museum display during the initial exhibition for the bones, and now it has become a piece of museum history. Though this piece is simple, it is representative of an exciting time in Norwich's history. Its cartoony flair is endearing, and I think played a part in making the mastodon a beloved figure and story in our town. I hope you have enjoyed this quick glimpse into Norwich's history, and hopefully you learned something new along the way. Again, my name is Kate Bakos, and I'm wishing you all a very healthy and safe rest of your February, and we can't wait to be able to welcome you again back at the Norwich Museum.